Welcome back to the Huddle podcast. I'm your host, Owen, and today we're going to be looking at what rookies are going to be leading their position groups when it comes to fantasy football in the upcoming NFL season. I'm going to go down and break down each position group and give you a handful of rookies, one of which I say is definitive going to be the leader of that position group, as well as some honorable mentions, and they're going to be kind of ranked in order, which I think they're going to end up landing or having opportunity when it comes to being a fantasy producer. Just a heads up, this is not going to be like a dynasty thing. This is going to be based off a 1-year sample size fantasy league, no keeper leagues or anything like that. So you'll see some players where I say, they might not see as much action this year, so they were going to be lower down on my little listing here. And that's not to say they won't in future seasons, which is why maybe a dynasty episode of this may be more what you're looking for. And I'm going to be looking into doing that because I know I'm friends with a guy who does Dynasty stuff, and Caleb, who helps out Dynasty Indexed, and he runs a lot of Dynasty leagues, and that's a whole second part of our draft thing, is that it's a Dynasty-based website. So I might have him on, and we might discuss this kind of stuff when it comes to Dynasty fantasy as well, but for this episode specifically, it's going to be the 1-year fantasy structure. PPR is how I'm going to roll with it. It's just how I preference liking it, and I'll probably talk about why the PPR affects it here or there, so you'll be able to easily replace it if you're playing in a non-PPR league. But other than that, let's get right into it. I'm going to start with the least interesting positions. So I'm going to go with defensive individual positions first because I have played in leagues that you have the individual defensive players as well as overall defenses. So this might help some people out who play in those leagues. Plus, it stretches the episode out, and really we're going to make you wait until you get to hear what my thoughts about it for like quarterbacks and running backs are at the end of this episode. So really stay tuned and stick here at the end of the episode to hear about those things. And let's just get right into our first category, which is going to be DBs. Now, DBs, when you're playing in a fantasy sense, you mostly want to look for like safeties or slot corners because they're going to rack up tackles as well as passes defended and interceptions, whereas your outside corners really don't see a lot of tackle production outside of some rare occasions. So that's why I kind of went with this first category. The first two are safeties. Our number one guy is going to be Brian Branch. He's going to be a slot corner, I think, for the Detroit Lions here, but he also played safety in college at Alabama, so he's very versatile. But safety or slot corner, which fills the two positions that we were just talking about. I think he was a capable tackler at Alabama, and with how Detroit is coached up, I do believe he'll continue to get his nose dirty, get in there and make some plays. So a guy who has really high IQ, who's not afraid to tackle, in a system that's going to encourage him to tackle and place him in positions to get those high tackle numbers, whether he's playing up high or closer to the line of scrimmage as a box safety or a slot corner. I think Brian Branch is probably going to be that guy that is going to be a staple for your DB section of your individual defensive player fantasy rankings. So keep an eye on him if you are playing one of those leagues. Another guy I would say would be Jordan Battle. Battle is currently slotted behind, I think it's, what's his name? Daxton Hill for the Cincinnati Bengals, who is slotted as their strong safety. However, Hill played a lot of slot corner when he was at Michigan in college, and with the loss of a guy like Eli Apple in the secondary for the Bengals, they may be looking to expand their corner room a little bit, and I would not be surprised if they had 3 safeties in the field with Daxton Hill coming down and playing that slot corner role, and then Jordan Battle coming on and rotating in as that box safety. So he may get a lot more play than what he's initially expected to get. And if he does, especially with what he did in college, you're going to expect a lot of closer to the line of scrimmage, tackles over the middle, coming up and impacting the run games, getting sent on blitzes. That's really what his game was at Alabama. And if he's going to be a strong safety for the Bengals with Daxton Hill sliding in a slot corner potentially, then I would expect a lot more production like that. And maybe you'd have to play this one by ear, especially if you're a Bengals fan. You'll probably know what they're rolling out. And I wouldn't pick him up until maybe a couple weeks into the season if he does show that that's what his position is going to be, or if that's what Daxton Hill is doing. So I wouldn't draft him outright. I'd have him as like a priority free agent, or like just have tabs on him after like week 2 and see what's going on with him over there. But yeah, I think he is set up for what his skill set was in college and where he's playing right now with who he's playing around to be able to have that kind of impact and play that kind of role that works out well as a DB in a fantasy sense. And finally, I want to throw in one corner, so I threw in Christian Gonzalez, the cornerback for the Patriots, first round pick. Bigger guy. He's going to get coached up by the New England Patriots team to really be that kind of physical presence in your line of scrimmage. And he is, like I said, he's a bigger corner, so he should be able to go out there and really get some tackle numbers and throw the body around, as well as just being able to produce, with interceptions and things like that. We've seen New England consistently produce corners who go out there and get interceptions, get pass breakups. They had Stephon Gilmore, they had J.C. Jackson, they had all these guys who we originally thought maybe weren't going to be as big of producers when going to New England, really just step it up, and then when they move out, not really be as productive as they were when they were in New England. So expect Gonzalez, with the talent he has, the size he has, to be a factor in the run game, as well as being the guy that may potentially be the next big producing cornerback for the Patriots. I just want to throw him on there because I felt bad just having safeties and slot corners on this list here. Next up is going to be linebacker, which is going to be where your big chunk of points come from a fantasy perspective. And Jack Campbell is an easy pick here. He's going to be the inside the tackle, racking up 10 to 15 tackles a game, maybe getting a couple tackles for losses. Just really that typical box linebacker, especially for a Detroit Lions team that's going to want to just grind out the game. And he's really a Detroit Lion through and through. So he's going to be that typical, rundown stopper. And I don't really see him projecting to have a lot of points on passing downs because he wasn't really the most fluid in pass drops, as well as when he's rushing the passer, he didn't really show any skills to do that either. So if your fantasy league is putting a high importance on tackles, especially for linebackers, I think he's definitely the one to go head and shoulders above anybody else with the ability to play on the field right away, because he's going to be slotted as a starter immediately, as well as just being that kind of bigger body guy who can absorb tackles and really bring down ball carriers. So I think he's your number one guy when it comes to prioritizing tackle numbers for a fantasy perspective. And then I look to Nick Herbig. He's going to be a rotational pass rusher / outside linebacker for the Steelers this year. He comes in that mold of like a Watt brother, but he's kind of a bit smaller than how either the Watts are. So he's going to be playing alongside T.J. Watt. I think T.J. Watt will be able to give him a lot of tips. Both Wisconsin boys. I was a big fan of Herbig. I fell off him a little more as the season went on and the draft cycle went on, where I got more film on him. And yeah, he did play with a little lack of power because he is a smaller guy, and you're really going to have to find a spot for him on a defense. And I think the Steelers are the perfect place for him to have gone because they already have that role kind of picked out. They get guys like Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt going, and they get real successful seasons out of those guys. So I think Herbig could be a mold that the Steelers know how to perfectly use. And with that case, I think he might be able to contribute because he had great sack numbers every year he was a starter in college. And even as a rotational guy in college, he looked impressive against other college guys. And I feel like with a team that has shown the ability to capitalize on players of this body type where other teams hadn't really been able to, I think he could have some early success that we weren't really expecting. He might be one of those people talked about as like a draft steal. I think it was a third or fourth round pick. Which I have been trying to say, but I think he might be able to put up a decent amount of sack numbers and tackle for loss numbers out of nowhere. So again, another guy kind of like Jordan Battle, where I would wait to see how many snaps he's getting per game before you grab him. But somebody I wouldn't be surprised if he did bounce. He did show out and really bounce to the front of the line and get that attention of people who were playing in these defensive fantasy leagues here. All right, and then we're going to talk about the D-line. Obviously, number one's going to be Will Anderson. He's just going to have the most attention to him, most opportunity to rush the passer and just play on every down. He's going to attract a lot of attention for being their one overall pick, and sometimes these guys don't really have the big numbers a rookie year just because they're trying to catch up to the pace of the game with such high expectations. However, I think he's a little bit different than that, and I think with how the Texans are, there's going to be a lot of teams running the ball against them. He's a solid run defender, so he should be getting a lot of tackle numbers on top of the sacks he does get, especially in that division where he's going to have basically a free run at whoever the Titans quarterback is, whoever the Colts quarterback is probably going to be Anthony Richardson, which would be a little harder to bring down, and then also Trevor Lawrence, whose offensive line has been kind of in flux ever since he was over the starter there. So I think he has a beneficial division, and as well will have the most opportunity, plus the highest skill levels, obviously. So I think he's definitely going to be the number one there. I would expect maybe probably a double-digit sack season for him, as well as like 50-plus tackles, which isn't that crazy, but I think for a rookie, expecting that is kind of on the higher end. Then we're going to go to Isaiah Foskey, who some people might not know. He was a standout at Notre Dame, has the Notre Dame sack record. However, he was seen as more of a limited athletically pass rusher. He's not going to be really a bendy guy. He really wins with power and smarts and uses of hand technique. I'm a big fan of Foskey. I thought he should have been like a high second-round pick. And he got drafted by the Saints. I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly where he was drafted in the draft order. I don't really feel like looking it up either. So just know I think he was a second or third-round pick in the draft, and I feel like that's kind of where he should have went. I probably even would have been okay with him going in the end of the first round. But right now he's slotted, according to our lads on the depth chart, behind Carl Granderson, who started 5 games for the Saints last year or 4 games for the Saints last year and 5.5 sacks. So, I mean, he's probably a solid rotational guy, but with Foskey's IQ and high floor of play, I think he can come in and really be in that next starter next to Cameron Jordan. He might not have the high upside of like a Will Anderson. He probably won't ever get double-digit sack seasons in the NFL, but expect like anywhere between 6 and 7 sacks, a lot of tackles for loss just from being smart and powerful. And I think he will be able to win out of all the guys here who I think will have to be backups or rotational players. He may be able to just win the starting job outright from camp, and be able to take over and start producing starter numbers right away. So that's why I have Foskey on here over a guy like Tyree Wilson, who is clearly going to be like a third optional pass rusher guy behind Chandler Jones and Max Crosby and stuff like that. So I went with Foskey over Wilson. And the final guy I want to talk about is B.J. Ojulari. He was drafted to the Arizona Cardinals, but right now he's slotted to be behind 2 of their former picks. When it was one, Myjai Sanders, who was a third-round pick to Cincinnati last year. They're giving him a chance to start now after J.J. Watt retired, as well as Chandler Jones leaving last season. And they also have Cameron Thomas, who was another guy they drafted, I believe, in the 3rd round out of San Diego State. Those are the 2 guys who are currently slotted to have those kind of starting jobs over B.J. Ojulari, but I think Ojulari is just such a talented pass rusher and has a lot of pass rushing moves that he'll be able to force his way on the field, even if it is just a third down pass rushing guy, and have some success against some of these teams in the NFC West, like the Rams, who don't really have the best offensive lines. So despite him being a backup on the depth chart, I feel like Myjai Sanders obviously couldn't force his way into the starting role despite being a 3rd-round pick. Same thing with Cameron Thomas, who I think actually was a 4th-round pick. Couldn't, force his way into a starting role until, there was no one in front of them to beat them out. And I feel like Ojulari may be able to beat these guys out for more snaps by the end of the year and really be a high-producing pass rusher for a team that might not have a lot of bright spots on their defense. All right, we breezed through the defensive players, individual fantasy guys there. And let's just go into now the more important stuff, the tight ends. We're going to start with tight ends with, I think, might be the biggest producer this year. It's just going to be Dalton Kincaid for the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo's been trying to go towards a 2 tight end set where they have 2 guys on the field and give you the threat of running the ball every down, but also be able to throw the ball to those tight ends. Dawson Knox has developed as a blocker and is probably the better blocker of the 2 right now on the team, and is still a solid receiving prospect. Outside of Diggs and Davis, who Davis struggled this past year, they really needed another weapon out there. And Dalton Kincaid is in that Travis Kelce mold of being like this big slot type of tight end. Now, he is a bigger bodied guy, so he's like 6'5", 240-ish. So he should be able to effectively run somewhat against linebackers who are his same size or even going and blocking DBs. I wouldn't expect him to be the guy to go and block a defensive end. That'll be more Dawson Knox's role. He'll be more falling up to the second level and stuff like that, and that'll be where he's successful. However, that doesn't matter for fantasy. What matters for fantasy is the fact that he is a phenomenal receiver, and he's probably going to be used as a receiving first option of the 2 tight ends. I expect Knox to lose a lot of production. I want to stay away from him in fantasy this year. And it's going to flow more towards Kincaid. He's also going to make up for Isaiah McKenzie getting cut. Those receiving yards are probably going to funnel into Kincaid a little bit, as well as guys who just were kind of random contributors out of the tight end room, kind of like Quentin Morris last year. He's going to really absorb all of their receiving yards, especially with Josh Allen quarterback, who's going to be throwing it around. And even though there's going to be more of an emphasis on the run game, he's going to get his 4,000 yards, and they're going to throw it like 30-plus times a game. Kincaid is going to get a decent size of receiving targets in that offense. So, especially because he's going to be the primary receiving option from tight ends between him and Dawson Knox, I'm probably out the get-go. So I think Kincaid is definitely going to be the guy that, if you're looking for a rookie tight end to really show out right away, despite him having competition with Knox for targets, as well as with Diggs, who's going to get the majority of the targets, and Davis, who's looking for a bounce back, I still think there'll be enough targets to go around that Kincaid should get like 5 to 10 a game and have some 100-yard games this season. Some guys who don't have as much competition is Sam Laporta, Detroit. We know Jared Goff loves his tight ends. Sam Laporta is a converted wide receiver to tight end, so I don't know if he'll be used a lot as a blocking tight end. He'll probably be used more and drafted to be used more as a receiving option from the line of scrimmage, and I think Jared Goff will be able to utilize him a lot especially when they're going to be running the ball a lot. And even though Singleporter's not going to be asked to block as much or be as good of a blocker, you can expect him to be on the field often. So he's slotted to be their starter right now. Jared Goff loves tight ends. He's a former receiver. Expect him to put up some receiving stats this year, even though he's going to have to fight Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and the other guys they have over there on the Lions to get targets. I still think he'll get his fair share. So Sam Laporta is another name later in the rounds you want to keep a lookout for. And then this one is kind of a 2-for-1. It's Luke Musgrave or Tucker Kraft. They're both tight ends by the Packers. They drafted both of them. I feel like they're both kind of similar. I scouted both of them, and I think they're like the same grade for me. Super athletic guys. Musgrave is not as good of a blocker as Kraft is, but he's a bigger, more athletic dude and played in the Pac-12. Kraft is a little bit better blocker with the sacrifice of not being as good of a route runner and just like slightly less as a receiver. I think Musgrave may be the starter, but he also has injury history. I wouldn't really draft either of these guys. I would wait to see who emerges as a starter and if Jordan Love is really able to utilize those guys more, or if he's going to default to using his receivers like Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and stuff like that. So I would stay away from them, but I would in the draft itself. But I would keep an eye on them for when free agency is going to pick up after the draft and probably after like week 1 or week 2, maybe even after preseason week 4 if you have your draft right before that. See who they're resting, who got the most targets during preseason, really try to get an indicator of who's going to be their starting tight end and if Jordan Love is really using those tight ends or if the offense is being designed and drawn up to utilize the tight ends more often. All right, moving on to wide receivers. We got a lot of guys here, so we're going to try to move through them kind of quickly. My number 1 wide receiver is going to be Jordan Addison. I was really, there's the first round picks of JSN, who's going to have to compete with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf and rely on Geno Smith continuing his upward ascend as a quarterback, or at least flatlining, not going back down, not declining from what he did last year. So I was kind of scared off by that. Then there is Quentin Johnston, who's going to be fighting with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, which Mike Williams is one of Justin Herbert's favorite targets. Now, it is a Justin Herbert offense with Kellen Moore now calling the shots, so there might be more targets and yards to go around. He's probably some guy I probably left off of here that maybe you can make an argument for. However, I do think there's so much competition on the offense, and we don't really know what a Kellen Moore offense is going to look like for the Chargers, that I would probably stay away from him with the first-round wide receivers. And then also there was Zay Flowers, who I didn't really see as a first-round pick, and the Ravens also brought in OBJ, and it's the Ravens who like to run the ball more, and I don't really trust Lamar Jackson to not give Mark Andrews the majority of the targets, and then when he's not looking at Mark Andrews, he's going to be switching over to Rashad Bateman or OBJ. I think Zay Flowers is going to be a gimmick guy early on in his career, which I think is good for him as a player. I think that's what I was talking about when I had him in my wide receiver rankings, that he should be like a gimmick guy, allowed to adjust to this the game and find a right fit for him in an offense, but that doesn't really prove that he's going to or be indicative of that he's going to score a lot of fantasy points his rookie year. So I would stay away from Zay Flowers as well. That's why I have Jordan Addison. I think Jordan Addison was a guy who I saw a lot of talent from, and maybe not a first-round pick or maybe a back end of the first-round pick or first round. I think he was going to be a good number 2 receiver. I always said that he was a little bit small, be an outside guy, and I don't know. I felt he was explosive, but I didn't know how good his route running was to be a traditional slot guy. I felt like a number 2 outside receiver would be good, have somebody to take the attention of the big number 1 corner off of him, which Justin Jefferson will do, and allow him to really work as like the counter to that guy. And I think this is the perfect fit for him when it comes to where he needed to go to succeed and who he has playing around him. So I think Addison, more than anybody, found the perfect fit of those first-round wide receivers and is going to have the most opportunity to score or fantasy points because all the attention is going to be on Justin Jefferson, and Kirk Cousins will be able to find his number 2 guy there, and he's going to be really taking that spot of Adam Thielen and replacing all of Adam Thielen's targets and yards that he was getting over the past few years when he wasn't hurt. Other wide receivers, Josh Downs. I think Josh Downs is going to play that more Devonta Smith role in the Colts offense. I feel like Michael Pittman is going to be the guy on the outside that people are going to take a lot of attention to. But really, Devonta Smith was that number 1 receiver before A.J. Brown got there in that Eagles offense and really performed well in that role. So even though he's not the outside guy, he's more of a slot, he will get the majority of the targets and get schemed up the most, as opposed to a guy on the outside like Michael Pittman who's going to take away attention and go downfield. And Richardson will probably defer mostly to his slot guy there just because he's going to be a little shaken with the speed of the game, not really used to playing football at a higher level like this, only had like 13 games in college. So expect his tight ends and slot receivers to do well. And with Josh Downs being drafted to be like that, he's kind of a thinner guy who runs a lot of good routes and probably is projected to be a slot dude who can't really be physical over the middle, kind of like how Devonta Smith was projected to be. I think that'll be his role in this Shane Steichen offense. So expect him to really pop off and be that one wide receiver on the Colts that has some good production with Richardson's struggles. I think we have Justin Shorter for the Bills. I think Shorter, if he gets on the field, he'll be that Gabe Davis type guy, and they're going to find a way to get him on the field and get him active, especially if Gabe Davis struggles early on. They might bring him on. Especially if they want to go like heavy packages, it'll probably be Davis and Shorter, who are these bigger bodied guys who can block. I expect him to get a fair share of snaps. I don't know if he'll get break 500 receiving yards, just because there isn't that really lack of a third receiving option with Kincaid coming in and hoping for Davis and Diggs to bounce back. But if there is going to be a guy that breaks out that is kind of not being talked about in that Bills offense, it's going to be Justin Shorter. I have a whole video talking about it on YouTube. You can go check that out. Then we got Puka Nacua, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. I tweeted this out on draft night, or when Puka Nacua got drafted. I think it was on day 3. Him going to the Rams with Sean McVay is insane. He was like this. He transferred from Washington, BYU. He's kind of raw when it comes to his route running, things like that, but he's 6'4", can run really fast, is super athletic, was used as a wildcat quarterback in the backfield, going down the field on screens. He's super fluid as an athlete. I feel like if any team's going to make the most out of his skill sets, especially if being raw, where you just tell them, we're scheming you here, we're getting the ball here, I trust Sean McVay to do it more than anything. And they've been looking for that number 2 receiver outside of Cooper Kupp, who also gets injured quite a bit. So expect Puka Nacua to be a solid number 2 receiving option on the Rams team that's going to try to bounce back a little bit, get healthier. And if Cooper Kupp does go down again, I think Nacua is going to be the one that's going to be tasked to step in and be that kind of volume receiver for the team over the middle, on the screen, stuff like that. Just getting schemed up touches to utilize his athleticism a lot. So I really like Puka Nacua. I should probably have him above Justin Shorter, maybe even just Josh Downs. But sorry, you can hear how excited I'm talking about him. And the next down is another one of those and/or scenarios. It's going to be Tank Dell or Xavier Hutchinson. I like both these guys. I'm kind of shocked Hutchinson fell to the 6th round. I think it might just be the stigma of tall Iowa State wide receivers and struggles of separation. But I feel like unlike a guy like Hakeem Butler, Hutchinson was able to get a lot of separation in college. And he is slotted to be a primary backup to a guy like Robert Woods and John Mechie and Nico Collins. Those are the starters right now, and Tank Dell and Xavier Hutchinson are kind of on that same tier of second-team wide receivers. I feel as though Robert Woods is getting older in years and is probably more injury-prone, so I'd expect Tank Dell to start taking his snaps away. And Nico Collins and John Mechie, well, I'm hoping for John Mechie to have a good season because of what he's had to go through. I don't know if he's going to be ready for day 1. That might be where Xavier Hutchinson steps in, or if Nico Collins struggles at all, I feel like Hutchinson could probably dig into his snaps as well. So as a bigger body receiver option on that offense with CJ Stroud. So whoever emerges from these two guys as like that rookie contributor on this young Houston Texans offense, swing with them. But I wouldn't be shocked if either or, maybe both of them, started to emerge a little bit come the end of the season there. And then finally, A.T. Perry, wide receiver for the Saints. We've seen Derek Carr have some success with some bigger body wide receiver targets. The Saints constantly have injury problems, especially with like Michael Thomas. Chris Olave also got injured last year, and him and Michael Thomas will be the 1 and 2 receivers, but really there's always kind of a crapshoot behind them. I think A.T. Perry can come in. I'm a fan of his. I thought he should have been like a 3rd-round pick. Bigger body guy, doesn't really have speed, but can get open downfield, has the ability to get open on comebacks, things like that, really uses his size and physicality to get open against smaller DBs. I feel like a guy like Derek Carr can really utilize that receiver, and I wouldn't be surprised if he starts to emerge later on if there's some injuries in the wide receiver core, or just as that 3rd option on the Saints offense, who catches the big deep ball every other game kind of thing. All right, now on to running backs, which is debatably less important now than wide receivers in the common fantasy kind of meta, but we'll see how that goes with this season. I know it was definitely true for last season. Obviously, Bijan Robinson's number 1. Expect 1,500 to 1,800 yards on the ground for him this year in a run-heavy offense in Atlanta. Especially, and also he can contribute in the passing game, so he might be able to hit that 2,000 all-purpose yards mark. I think that's probably a safe bet for him to do. So really going to be like a 1st-round pick. He's already been talked about as like a top 10 guy. I'm not going to dwell on him too much. Everyone knows who Bijan Robinson is. Jahmyr Gibbs is probably like the next tier. So he was kind of, I was like, do I want to be like controversial and like opposite of what the majority of people are saying, especially because I don't have a lot to talk about with Bijan. Most people know who he is, and just put Jahmyr Gibbs as the number one guy. I didn't really want to be that contrarian. So Jahmyr Gibbs is going to contribute a lot as a runner in the Lions offense because they like running the ball a lot. However, they did bring in David Montgomery, and I foresee a lot of it, especially with them talking about him playing slot receiver, where it's going to be Deuce with a running back in the backfield with Sam Laporta in the slot on the left side with somebody on the outside, and then Sam Laporta on the outside on the left side with Jahmyr Gibbs in the slot, or vice versa. And then also we have Amon-Ra St. Brown, another outside wide receiver, some kind of mixing of that, and that'll be their kind of set for when they want to run the ball and still threaten to throw it. So I feel like Jahmyr Gibbs, even if he's not the main running back in the backfield, maybe David Montgomery is going to be the lone back in the backfield, he will then flex out to the slot, and he'll probably be on the field a lot more than guys who are lower on this list will be. So especially if you're in a PPR league, get Jahmyr Gibbs. You should probably be a borderline first-round pick in a PPR league. He's going to see a lot of passing targets as well as a lot of rushing opportunities on a Detroit offense that's going to try to forge their own identity. Devin Achane, just kind of a speed guy brought into Miami. He's the one that's really preventing them from signing Dalvin Cook because they don't really need to spend that much money on a guy like Cook if they have a guy like Achane on a cheap contract. Really small, 5'8", but God, is he a burner. He was a track star. I scouted him for this upcoming draft class. I really liked him. And with how Miami runs the ball kind of more laterally before making hard cuts and trying to get upfield with speed, he's perfect for that system. So if you're looking for a guy that maybe isn't the starting running back, but isn't a kind of like a committee back area that you think may be able to get some big runs and score a couple touchdowns, I think Achane is going to be the guy you're going to look for with the Dolphins. Tajay Spears, I put him on here. I didn't get to scout him this past cycle. However, he is on the Titans offense. And with Derrick Henry suffering as many injuries as he has in the past, you really have to ask yourself, like, who's going to be the guy to step up and take over for Henry once he gets hurt? Because it's getting inevitable at this point. He's getting up there in age, and it's happened the past few years. This past year was more detrimental than others because he was out for a lot of the time or a longer period. You have Hassan Haskins, who I'm a big fan of, but I think Spears, just because he's the newer blood, might get the tip before Haskins does. So expect him, especially if Henry goes down, or even just to spell Henry a little bit, to come out. I wouldn't draft him because if Henry's healthy, he won't get more than like 5 to 7 carries a game. But as soon as Henry gets injured, you're signing Spears, you're signing Haskins, and I would probably defer to Spears right now over Haskins, which kind of hurts me because I was a really big fan of Hassan Haskins last year. Our final running back's going to be Zach Evans, somebody I was kind of lower on in the draft cycle. I had him as like a 5th-round guy, while most people had him as like a 2nd or 3rd-rounder, and he ended up going in the 7th round to the Rams, which I think may be the best spot for him. Obviously, Sean McVay, creative genius, talked about that a lot with Puka Nacua earlier, but also just having Cam Akers, an oft-injured running back, at number 1 spot before him, and then Kyren Williams, who's a smaller back, never really seen as like a number 1 guy, even though I really liked him. He's more of a receiving back, which is what Zach Evans kind of struggles with, this receiving, so that could be complimentary to him if Cam Akers goes out. And also, Kyren Williams is also kind of injury prone with a high ankle sprain last year and being a smaller back. So Zach Evans might be able to come in and get starting snaps halfway through the season if both guys get hurt, or if they just want to be able to spell those guys. I feel like Zach Evans would be more primarily the spell guy over a guy like Kyren Williams because he'll be more their passing down option with just due to his physical limitations. Evans is really a bullish runner. He's not the most athletic, but he has some pop to him, and he's hard to get brought down. So I feel like if anybody can get the most out of him, Sean McVay can, and he's also in a position where he has oft-injured teammates ahead of him that he might be able to jump in front of if they do get hurt again this year. Not hoping for injuries, but just a potential to keep an eye on him. I wouldn't draft him, but, keep an eye on him, keep his name on your mind while you're going through the first few seasons, especially if you see if Cam Akers or Kyren Williams comes up hurt. And we're finally here. We're finally to the quarterbacks. I'm going to do this in reverse the way I've been doing it. The past few, I've just been saying, top guy, then going down my list to less and less. I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up to the top so I can, milk out as much conversation topic on this I can. So at the very bottom, I'm going to say Will Levis. Not because I'm not a fan of his. I know a lot of people like to hate on him now for where he got drafted and etc. He was actually my favorite quarterback in this draft from his mix of what he had going on mentally, experience-wise, having to overcome what he had to overcome in Kentucky, as well as his physical capabilities. I really think if you're in a dynasty league, he is a safe pick in a rookie draft, and you can probably expect him to be the starter for the Titans as soon as next year. However, for this season, Tannehill's already the entrenched starter, and they have Malik Willis, who's another quarterback I really liked the year prior, who has been in there for a season, even though he's kind of in the doghouse right now. I feel like they'll still defer to him as the primary backup just because he has an extra year of experience in the system. So Will Levis, I doubt we'll see any play this year, but I did want to mention him because the other three top guys are going to get mentioned. Then we have Jake Haener, who is kind of this mid-round guy, really low ceiling, high floor, backup kind of guy. I really liked him last year when it was kind of a depravement of quarterback talent in that draft class. Thought he was a top 5 quarterback in that draft. He stayed one more year to play at Fresno. Undersized, but really good leader. High heart, good accuracy, but he's only got so much he can go with his size and physical limitations. So he's going to be Derek Carr's backup in New Orleans, and I would expect him, if Derek Carr gets hurt again, because he has shown a propensity to get hurt, especially in his later years, Jake Haener might be able to come in and get some starts. Even if the Saints struggle and they want to bench Carr, Haener would be the primary guy to come in and take over for him. All right, now the top 3. These are going to be kind of ranked. So third is going to be C.J. Stroud. He is going to be the starter for the Texans. I don't think that's any fear. I know that people talk about Davis Mills coming in, but I don't think outside of maybe a game he'll be the starter. But C.J. Stroud should start 14 or 15 games this season at minimum. So with that, and they have some decent receiving talent. They have Robert Woods, they have John Mechie, they have Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Xavier Hutchinson, like I mentioned earlier. I do think he has some weapons there. However, he is playing in a new offense with offensive line that really needs to start gelling a bit more. They have the talent there, but they haven't been able to really gel it together as much as you'd like. And they have 2 running backs in Damian Pierce, and they signed Devin Singletary. So expect them, with the defensive head coach, to run the ball a lot, play strong defense, and really try to bring their rookie quarterback along slowly, especially with no dominant number 1 receiver type on the roster right now. And he doesn't really offer much as a rusher, so I wouldn't expect him to be the guy that puts up a giant statistical season his rookie year, just with the circumstances that are surrounding him in Houston right now. So even though C.J. Stroud is a good quarterback, I do doubt the fact that he'll be able to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year as a rookie. Number 2 is going to be Anthony Richardson, simply because of the rushing ability. If he broke 800 rushing yards this year, it'd be amazing, and typically that's what happens with good fantasy quarterbacks. They have that running ability. You see Allen, Hurts, Mahomes a little bit, Lamar Jackson. These guys are able to take off and run with it as well as throw the ball. And with Shane Steichen's offense, I feel like that'll be an emphasis with the read option game with Jonathan Taylor. And they have Michael Pittman, they have Josh Downs, they have Zay McKenzie. They have some receiving talent around him as well as an offensive-minded head coach. So expect Richardson to make some leaps and bounds as the season progresses and he gets more and more experience playing in the NFL. I just don't think he'll be able to outpace our number 1 guy, obviously Bryce Young, the quarterback for the Panthers. I really think he has the best weapons of anybody of the top 3 here. He has Adam Thielen if he can stay healthy. He has DJ Chark. He has, tight end was in Baltimore, went to Cincinnati. I can't think of his name right now. Former baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Hayden Hurst, that's it. As well as guys who may be looking to break out like a Terrence Marshall, who performed better last year with that cavalcade of crap that was the quarterback position than he did his rookie year. So expect that. Plus with Frank Reich coming in, who was really just the fall guy for that terrible Colts team anyway. I feel like he's a good coach. They're going to be able, and he has an all-star assistant coaching roster around him. So I feel like Bryce Young has the most talent around him when it comes to offense, when it comes to passing options. The running back room can stand to get better, but that's not really the most important, especially because you can just scheme up running, and running back talent outside of the elite guys isn't the most important thing on an offense. And this is the first year that they're returning all 5 starters in the offensive line for Carolina. So just with the coaching staff, the weapons, and just who Bryce Young is being the first overall pick, I feel like he is the most likely to be in that top 10 quarterback spot. He has the weapons. He can run himself. And I just think his support system and ability, he's going to play all games. He will be able to be the guy of this crop that is the biggest fantasy quarterback of all of them. So that is my list of all of the players by position who I think will do good as rookies for fantasy football this year. 1 year fantasy. Dynasty may be a different episode later on, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'm doing some top 10 videos now on YouTube. You want to go check those out. Those have been performing really well for my channel. And I'll have more podcasts coming out. As I'm now healing from my sprained ankle, I should have more time to come over here, do research, and just overall put some more effort into this channel. So thank you for listening / watching if you're on YouTube, and I'll see you guys in the next one.